Dressrosa is arguably the most chaotic arc of the series, heavily saturated with an unprecedented amount of characters and conflicts. Now, whether you enjoyed the dense plot or not, I think the sheer number of storylines and accompanying backstories, fights, and new personalities can make it easy to miss the greater point of the arc, because there was an idea that Oda was trying to communicate throughout Dressrosa that puts the entire narrative of One Piece into perspective. But before getting to that, I want to briefly discuss the significance of Dressrosa as the first major New World arc. Dressrosa was our introduction to what New World conflict looks like. Sure, we had two post-time skip arcs before this, but Fishman Island's story literally took place in a bubble, isolated from the world, and Punk Hazard took place on an abandoned island. Dressrosa was the first time that the story truly opened up into the New World, and as such this arc marked a sharp shift from the more self-contained conflicts of the pre-time skip to the far more complex conflicts of post-time skip One Piece. Now it's not just the Straw Hats versus Doflamingo. Even in the small location of Dressrosa, we see that almost every major power of the One Piece world exerts their influence. We are shown that everyone has an agenda, everyone has some skin in the game, everyone is sending some of their forces into the fray. Doflamingo is attempting to protect the Smile Factory and recapture Caesar so that he may continue supplying Smile Devil Fruits to the Emperor Kaido for his growing Zone army. However, there's a conflict of interest, as another Emperor, Big Mom, needs Caesar to continue with the creation of her own gigantified army, and so her forces are sent to intercept Caesar at Dressrosa as well. At the same time, Doflamingo has offered up the valuable Mera Mera no Mi fruit in an effort to bait Luffy, but this results in the Emperor Blackbeard catching wind and sending his commander to Dressrosa to win the fruit so that he may continue to build his own supply of powerful devil fruits. Now, because Doflamingo runs not only the Smile production but also various underworld trades, the revolutionaries have shown up to disrupt some of the underworld trade that may have been causing difficulties in their operations, and also to pick up the powerful Mera Mera no Mi for themselves. But while all these unlawful forces are attempting to further their own plans, the Marines recognize a situation that could spiral out of control, and so they send an admiral to keep things in check. Beyond this, forces even above the Marines in the world government have sent out CP0 to maintain order after Doflamingo's supposed deposition as king. But since the revolutionaries are there, CP0 is now also compelled to catch the revolutionaries and keep tabs on illegal trade. And of course, there are numerous nations from across the sea that have sent their strongest fighters to try and pick up the Mera Mera no Mi as well, and increase the might of their own countries. Amidst all this are the two supernovas, Luffy and Law, trying to make their first move in the game by going after the supply of one of the four emperors. Remember, before the time skip we had heard a lot about the New World. We had a general idea of the big players that awaited there, but we had yet to actually delve into the intricacies of this grander conflict. This arc was partly about showing us the power dynamics at play, the push and pull of all these forces competing in a sort of arms race. So narratively speaking, Dressrosa was a transition into New World storytelling, but thematically speaking, what was the arc actually about? Well, there's someone we need to talk about first. Before getting into any of the themes, we need to discuss Doflamingo, because so much about his character is representative of what this arc was all about. Now, Doflamingo was not only the most memorable aspect of Dressrosa for many readers, he has quickly become the most popular villain in the entire series, and I have to say that at least conceptually, this is the most complex villain Oda has shown us so far, with by far the most to break down. To give a quick comparison, consider another major villain, Rob Lucci. Now, I like Lucci, but the fact is that the concept behind this villain was fairly straightforward. Lucci was simply the weapon of a larger, more nebulous enemy, and as such, Lucci's role was to be the ultimate agent of justice. That's a singular idea that he was meant to represent. In contrast, Doflamingo represents a wide variety of ideas. He plays many roles, some even diametrically opposed to each other. To begin with, early on in the series, Oda presented Doflamingo to us as seemingly an agent of chaos, eagerly awaiting the turbulent times of the upcoming New Age. This gleeful, carefree nature was reinforced at Marineford as we saw him reveling in the chaos of the war, later on showing no regard for the orders of the world government. His role as the wild card of the series seemed confirmed when we learned of his title, Joker. However, when we finally get to his arc, to Dressrosa, we see the flip side of his character. Yes, Doflamingo welcomes conflict and chaos in the world, but only so long as his own control isn't threatened. Only so long as his own position and security are absolute. He needs to be able to control everything, because literally and figuratively, Doflamingo is a puppet master. With his string fruit, he can control people, he can make them dance like puppets, he can create his own puppets, he can keep victims trapped in a cage. This is all representative of who he is. Look at what he does both inside and outside Dressrosa. In the larger scheme of the New World, Doflamingo is at the center of a web. He's the biggest underworld broker, he's the guy that pirates, countries, and even emperors go to for special weapons and goods. Doflamingo is essentially holding the reins to all these monsters. He's the man pulling the strings. He even has the world government on a string thanks to his knowledge of their secret. Now within Dressrosa, the puppet master's control is even more absolute. He has manipulated the entire country into believing what he wants them to believe, creating his own little world where people are controlled without them even being aware of it, as any dissenting figures are silenced and removed from everyone's memory. Even the underground toy factory system is like a web, with lines running all throughout the nation. Anyone who dares to go against him is pulled into the web, turned into a toy, and erased from the citizens' consciousness as they go on believing that nothing is wrong. Doflamingo essentially gets to play God in Dressrosa, which brings us to another interesting dichotomy, Doflamingo symbolizing both God and the devil. Doflamingo was a celestial dragon, who are emphasized throughout the story as ruling above mortal men as gods in the Holy Land. However, Doflamingo's father chooses to give up this status, this godhood, and so Doflamingo is kicked out of heaven and is sent to Earth as a fallen celestial dragon. However, even though Doflamingo has supposedly lost his godhood and been barred from heaven, he refuses to accept it. If he can't be one of the gods of the world, for the moment he can settle with playing God in Dressrosa, and so he establishes absolute control over the country, making the citizens believe he is their perfect king, ruling from far above and erasing anyone who opposes him. But while Doflamingo can play God in his own little world of Dressrosa, in reality the true nature of the man who was cast out of heaven is more like the devil. After all, secretly Doflamingo is the lord of the underworld, the man at the center of all villainous trade on the sea. And in the underground beneath Dressrosa itself he conducts his nefarious dealings. This man has become a demon. Cast out of heaven, he now wants nothing more than to see the world burn, and Oda presents him as literally the champion of evil. This notion of Doflamingo representing both God and the devil is perfectly captured in his epithet, the Heavenly Demon. One of my favorite parallels in the series is an extraordinarily similar scene shared by Doflamingo and Enel, the first self-proclaimed god of the story who is also more like a devil. A mortal man with a long-held grudge against God is finally able to catch God off guard and land a seemingly fatal blow. Enel should have been killed by the rejectile. Doflamingo shouldn't have survived the gamma knife. Yet, just when the invincible god seems to have been killed, there is a miraculous resurrection. If God cannot be defeated by mortal efforts, then the only one who can accomplish it is God's natural enemy. Now the last significant role Doflamingo plays, and my personal favorite, is that for a long time he has been a sort of narrator figure, a herald of the changing times. Oda has essentially used him as a mouthpiece to comment on the upcoming shifts in the world, going all the way back to the end of Skypiea, where Doflamingo first introduces the concept of the New Age to the reader, an age that is fast approaching, where the weak will be swept away and only the strong will survive. He again warns of this upcoming new era as he reveals to us that war is approaching. And later, of course, in the midst of this war, the most pivotal conflict of the story so far and the final battle of the current age before the advent of the new age, we get Doflamingo's iconic speech capturing the state of the world and what this battle means for the world going forward. Lastly, of course, after his defeat, Doflamingo gives his send-off speech, proclaiming that the breaking point has been reached, that the real war, the greatest war in history and the true battle for the throne is about to begin. Finally, the new age that he had talked about for so long has arrived, and the irony is that he was its first casualty. The man who dreamed of an era where the weak would be swept away and only the strong would survive, the man who was so confident in his own unshakable position in this coming age, the man who others had bet on to follow into this new age, never thought for a moment that he wouldn't make the cut. He never imagined that it would be his own defeat that would birth this age. In retrospect, it was inevitable if you think about it. If the new age was always going to be the point where all hell breaks loose, then naturally the man holding the strings to the delicate balance of power in the world would be the first to go. Keeping everything about Doflamingo's character in mind, let's get into Dressrosa's themes. Some of the key themes of the arc are conveniently spelled out for us in the first chapter. This is a story of love, passion, and toys? Well, we'll get to that last one in a minute. This was indeed a land of passion, and really this is the first time One Piece is actually focused on romance. Kiros and Scarlet, Senor Pink and Luciane, Sai and Baby 5, Leo and Manchuri, even Sanjay and Viola, there were more pairings in this arc alone than the entire story so far. And the focus wasn't just on romantic love, but love in general. The love between parent and child, communicated through Kiros and Rebecca. The love that Corazon, whose name literally means heart, and who occupied the heart seat, showed Law to bring him back from the path of hatred. But at the same time, this is a land of toys. Sounds like a nice place at first, right? But as the story progresses, we realize that these toys are in fact tragic figures, forgotten memories of the suffering in Dressrosa. Gradually, more and more tragedies are brought to light, all of which seem to trace back to Doflamingo. The tragedy of the Riku royal family, experienced by Riku, Kiros, and Rebecca, the tale of the Tontadas, the plight of the gladiators, and of course, the nightmarish existence of all the humans turned toys. And so by the end of the arc, we have come to realize that in reality this was a story about love, passion, and tragedy. Arguably the worst kind of tragedy where no one was even aware of the terrible acts that had occurred, and the suffering that was continuing in plain sight. And to that point, the other major theme that was stressed was the idea of shadows behind the lights. Dressrosa seemed like an idyllic nation when we first arrived, a vibrant land with a surprisingly popular king. However, this nation was all about outward appearances. It only needed to seem nice on the surface. The bright lights of the Colosseum make Dressrosa seem like a glamorous nation, when there are suffering gladiators locked away in the shadows. The toys seem to add to the charm of the country, when they're made to endure hell below the surface. That's what Dressrosa is, a shadowy nation where only the obedient citizens get to enjoy the world of light. The tragedies, the dirty secrets, the dark past, it's all being hidden, and the rebel forces are working towards the moment where the dark truth will be revealed, and Doflamingo's true colors will be shown. It's only natural that the plot of Dressrosa should center around rebellion, as the main thematic conflict was about freedom versus control. Again, this goes back to Doflamingo, the puppet master. Everyone in Dressrosa was under his control, whether they realized it or not. It was only when the birdcage actually manifested did the citizens of Dressrosa finally realize Doflamingo's true nature. But the reality is that the cage had always been there since the night he took over. They just couldn't see it. For 10 years he had manipulated the truth and subjugated the masses, and they had all been blissfully unaware. The rebel forces believe they can end his rule but are hopelessly outmatched against his regime. It's only when Luffy, the embodiment of freedom, finally comes along that the puppet master meets his natural enemy, and their final clash results in the end of the birdcage and the creation of a new, free land, not controlled by anyone. The final pages of Dressrosa succinctly tie together the themes of the arc. The strings of control that all trace back to Doflamingo have been broken, the tragedies that all trace back to Doflamingo have been revealed, and the darkness that Doflamingo had kept hidden has been brought to light. Alright, so taking all the themes of Dressrosa and the concept of Doflamingo into account, what did I mean when I said at the beginning that Dressrosa puts the entire narrative of One Piece into perspective? Well, Dressrosa tells us everything about the past, present, and future of the story. Dressrosa is meant to represent the entire world of One Piece in miniature. Think of it as essentially a scaled-down model, and Doflamingo's rule is fairly explicitly meant to parallel the world government's rule. The Celestial Dragons rule the world, Dressrosa is ruled by a lone Celestial Dragon. Doflamingo plays God in Dressrosa, just as the world government plays God on a global scale. Doflamingo rules from far above, from the highest point in Dressrosa located directly in the middle of the land. The Celestial Dragons rule from far above, from the top of the red line, located directly at the center of the world. Just as Doflamingo has created the facade that Dressrosa is an ideal nation and tricked his citizens into believing he is a good king, so too has the world government successfully brainwashed the world into believing it is the perfect regime and the absolute upholder of justice. Just as Dressrosa is far more shadowy than it may appear on the surface, with many dark truths kept hidden, so too is the world government far more dystopic than its citizens realize. And if Dressrosa is a land where there are countless tragedies that have been obscured by its ruler, so too has this been the story of literally the entire world of One Piece as we know it so far. This entire time we've been reading about a world where we are constantly presented with new tragedies, great injustices arc after arc, most of which can be traced back to the world government and the celestial dragons. And of course, just like in Dressrosa, these tragedies are all kept completely under wraps, such that the average citizen probably has no idea about what happened to Tom, or the fact that no one has ever been declared innocent at any slobby, or the hell that the criminals endure in Impel Down, or how nobles massacred the poor in kingdoms like Goa, or the discrimination that has plagued the fishermen, or the slave trade, or the child trafficking, or the amber lead poisoning, or the truth about O'Hara. And what happens to those who attempt to oppose the world government? The same thing that happens to those who attempt to oppose Doflamingo in Dressrosa. They are made to disappear. The world government doesn't have the convenience of sugar at their disposal, but this is what CP9 is for. This is what Buster Calls are for. Just like Doflamingo, they have their own global methods of silencing people and hiding the truth. And just like Doflamingo, the most important thing for them is to prevent everyone from awakening to the realities of their rule. That's why people are branded as criminals simply for seeking out knowledge. So if Dressrosa is representative of the world today, then how does the history of Dressrosa reflect the history of the world? Well, it's Doflamingo himself who explains that history is told by the winners. There once was a royal family that ruled over Dressrosa and was beloved by its people. One night, a gang of pirates took over, recast the royal family as villains, and presented themselves as the new just regime. To top it off, they obscured people's memory of the takeover by erasing facts from history. Now similarly, there once was a kingdom far greater than any other in the world. An alliance of nations overthrew this great kingdom, recast the people of this kingdom as villains, and then presented themselves as the new just regime. To top it off, they obscured people's memory of the takeover by erasing an entire century of history. Dressrosa essentially reaffirms everything that had already been hinted at about the true history of the One Piece world. The Doflamingo family that made themselves royalty in Dressrosa are in reality nothing more than a gang of pirates who were able to seize power. The celestial dragons are no better than pirates themselves, they were simply able to rebrand themselves as gods of the world after seizing power. Now it's not just the fact that Oda made Doflamingo represent God that's important, but also the type of god he is. Someone who is all about absolute control, who creates a world where people think they're happy, but anyone who steps out of line is removed. This is the type of god Oda is saying needs to be fought against in this world, and he's saying the opposite of this type of god, the natural enemy of such beings, is freedom, represented by Luffy. Luffy's speech to Doflamingo at the climax expresses a lot about what we can expect the story to be about down the line, and the role Luffy will play. The greatest thing the world government fears is that a man will eventually come bearing the tragedies of many upon his shoulders, just as Luffy did in Dressrosa. Luffy sent Doflamingo down, from heaven to earth, just as the celestial dragons will eventually be torn down from the heavens. Just as Luffy and his crew destroyed the sham of peace in Dressrosa, so too is it likely they will do the same for the world at large. If we want to get a little speculative, even something like Luffy climbing to the top of King's Plateau to face Doflamingo may foreshadow an eventual climb to a climactic showdown at the top of Marijoa. And as I've touched upon in past videos, the point where the people of Dressrosa were awakened to the truth of Doflamingo's nature and actually came to need a man like Luffy to save them was when Doflamingo's control became threatened, and he dropped the facade and simply began a great purge. Similarly, even though at the moment most citizens are oblivious to the true nature of the world government, we seem to be getting to a point where some secrets are going to come out, where waves of disturbance are beginning to build, and the next step for the world government will have to be a great cleansing. If Dressrosa is anything to go by, this cleansing may be the point where the people of the world will actually look to a pirate to bring an end to the world government's rule, and ultimately create a new world of freedom. If you enjoyed this video, then please like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter for updates, and you can directly contribute to the creation of more videos such as this through Patreon. Benefits include voting on future topics and access to a podcast with bonus content that had to be cut for time. Lastly, I want to give a big shout out to YouTuber O'Hara for creating the fantastic thumbnail. You can check out his channel in the description below, and I want to shout out all my patrons for their support, with special thanks to Simon Fines, Sebastian C., Ankazar, Mark S., Dustin Full, Lun, Patron, Michael Dreyer, Benji Mikado, Schwalbe, Patrick Olund, Spike SP, and Cliver Mort.